My career starts a long time ago. There used to be a thing called a KG, Keep Virginia Green crew.
While I was in school, I actually did seasonal work with the U.S. Forest Service. And I worked some just as a forest technician and then also some with the Youth Conservation Corps. So I worked with youth as an environmental educator.
I worked on the state forest. I was a student at Virginia Tech and looking for a summer job.
I worked part-time with Young Adult Conservation Corps, and I worked on the Cumberland State Forest.
And George Dean had come down to the campus and interviewed.
I can still remember being interviewed at Virginia Tech.
2 weeks after graduation, I was in Sandston looking for a place to stay. I'd hired on with the department.
Out of 120 or so that graduated with me in forestry at Virginia Tech in '74, there was maybe 10 or 12 of us that had jobs before graduation, so I felt pretty good about that. 5
out of the class that went with the Department of Forestry because they were the ones hiring at the time.
Got out of school, things were pretty tight for forestry jobs.
At that time they weren't hiring. There were positions available, but they weren't hiring.
And there was no jobs at that time. I'd interviewed with the state.
So I went to work for a paper company up in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan.
I had been in forestry with International Paper Company down in the Carolinas, and the recession in the early 80s hit. I went back to graduate school and got a degree in business.
So Wally Custard called one day, I was at work, said he had a job opening, and my wife accepted it.
Every time I was here for a visit, I'd come by the office and pester the guys up in the old office over on Alderman and McCormick.
I got the job by being a firefighter down in James City County, fighting brush fires, and the warden at the time knew about the opening up here, and he suggested I come up.
And then when they finally were able to hire, they hired 3 foresters for counties that had no forester.
And I started out as a Forester B, a trainee forester in Farmville.
They had a trainee forester position in each district.
Of course, at that time, we had 9 regions when I came to work. Then we were reduced down to 6 regions a few years after that. Then at this current time, we're down to 3.
And so it was about a year and 9 months in that trainee position.
Which I appreciated that because then I got to see a lot of different things with the Department of Forestry. They didn't put me right on the job. And
so when you started out, you presumed you would be there for a year or 2 and then move to a full-time county forester position.
Nelson County came open, and that's where I'd always wanted to be, so I jumped at the chance to go to Nelson to be the forester there.
I think the best position in the whole Department of Forestry is the area forester or technician position.
Think about it, what other job could you have that you'd fly in a helicopter, or you'd measure trees, or you'd be outside, or you'd be on big fires? It's a lot of variety in the job.
You're in the field, you get to make most of your decisions on day-to-day activities.
The sense of accomplishment, working with landowners, getting trees planted, putting a fire out, those kinds of things. The good hands-on things that good for the environment and the people.
I just found that I liked being in the woods and developed a liking for working with landowners.
I think that's the best part of the job, which is why I haven't so much wanted to move out of that position into a management or administration position.
I'm still an area forester 36 years later. I'm proud of it.
It's been pretty tough to have lasted this long and not wanted to go to work. And that's pretty much the work that you do, but also that's mostly the people that you work with, I think, anyway.
And we seemed to work together more with the adjacent counties. We weren't stretched quite as thin. We got to see each other more and work together more. You know, you got together maybe to mark or maybe to do a prescribed burn. And so there was more of that camaraderie, I think.
You know, we were kind of flexible. If somebody was burning, everybody would pitch in and go.
But that was great fun. It was hard work, but great fun because you're working together. It's a team effort.
You become engaged and attached to the place where you work, and the people that you interact with are the people that you live with. So it really is a nice opportunity to become part of a community.
Can't say enough about the people that work for this agency. Past, present, you know. People are really dedicated to what they do.
I hate to start naming people because I'm just going to leave somebody out.
Everybody that I've come in contact with within the forestry profession, whether it's agency related or outside the agency, has had some kind of influence.
You know, Steve Hass and Bobby Atkins, the two technicians, had been there a long time. They knew what was going on. I learned so much from them. And I know that they backed me up. They never had to tell me, but I know that landowners had to be saying, does she know what she's talking about? And they must have been saying, yeah, she does, listen to them.
As an Army veteran, I was working mostly with guys who had been in World War II. They really weren't going to let anything happen to me, and they were going to teach me all they knew.
The technician I worked with, Henry Womack, he was the chief forest warden in Prince Edward County. We worked together almost every day for 30 years.
I have to give Sue credit for some of that, because I wasn't the first female forester. And so she's been a friend and a mentor all along the way.
Jim Starr and Jim Bowen as my assistants, and we developed a program the way we thought it should go, and we started training our people that way, and ended up with a very strong region.
At one time we had the 3 Jims, Jim Garner, Jim Bowen, Jim Cook, really 4 Jims, and Jim Starr. And I'd say that group had more influence on me than anybody, because I had Bowen as a supervisor, I had Cook as a supervisor, and I worked with Starr.
Jim Starr and I actually knew each other in the Army. We were both in the same, we were both paratroopers in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Jim Bowen, he says, if you're going to make a decision, make a decision. He says, if it's right, you're fine. If it's wrong, he says, I'll back you up, we'll fix it. If you do something wrong, I'll probably take you to the carpet on it, but I won't feed you to the wolves.
Early on in my career, it was probably Jim Cook. He was very supportive of what I did, kind of pushed me in some directions and helped me, you know, grow as a new employee.
Jim Garner was a great instructor, he really was. He was a real strong, knowledgeable man.
Jim Garner, who has always, to me, had a tremendous vision through my career for what forestry and what the agency should be doing.
Wayne Bowman in Appomattox County, he was the county forester there. How to run the county, you know, how to deal with landowners, and you know, how to manage your programs in the county.
If you sit down and think back over your life and the people you come in contact with, they have some kind of influence on your makeup and your philosophy and outlook on life at that time.
I came to work here. Clark Lance was the name of the forester in charge of the seed orchard. I think back on talks that I had with Clark. He had just got out of the Army, and a remarkable individual, a gentle person. I think on him sometimes once or twice a day when I'm around here. I miss him.
Bob Dunn, because he was the forester in my area, he started in 1949, and his letters to landowners in the file, that was one of the best educations that I had ever had in how to deal with people. He just had a casual, laid-back style, so I started adopting that in my writings.
James Harris taught me how to tell a story, and with him around, it was always interesting. It was good stories. And
Tom Deeroff.
Tom Deeroff.
Tom Deeroff, Tim Tigner, brilliant individuals that were always very helpful.
And nobody I have met before or since is any better teacher than Thomas Deeroff.
He was such a practitioner with a wealth of knowledge.
Tom was so knowledgeable. I would go with Tom and work for him for the day whenever he was anywhere in the vicinity. And my reasoning was pretty simple. He taught me. I knew something when I left him.
Tom Deeroff. Anybody that's ever been in the woods with Tom Deeroff or had the pleasure to talk to him or practice forestry with him understands what you have there that's talking to you, and the best thing for you to do is just be quiet and write down every word he says. A tremendous.
Things have changed a lot, you know, with technology and just with the budget. Things have changed very quickly. And unfortunately, we're getting away from the hands-on in the woods, helping the landowners, and more to giving out information. And I don't really see that as a positive change, but I see why, because we're just, you know, the budget's cut and we don't have as many people to do it the way we used to do it.
Well, we've gone from a service-oriented agency. I first started, we were doing a lot of prescribed burns, measuring land, pushing fire lines.
20 or maybe even 30 prescribed burns during the summer. Total acres, over 1,000 acres.
We used to do a lot more prescribed burning, and we're doing more chemical site preparation now.
So many of the initiatives of this agency, once it was a proven thing, the private sector had some reason then to move in.
Of course, there was no such thing as a cell phone back then. And the only communication was from truck to truck and back to the regional office.
I think hands down, you've got to say technology is the biggest change. I mean, forestry, we've learned more about forestry. We've learned how to do things better, but I don't think there's been any change that's been any bigger than the technology change.
Planting trees that were generated from a process called embryogenesis, where you take one cell and through a laboratory process, you turn it into a tree. That's a big difference between what I did in 1964 and what we're doing now.
Well, now we're into doing things through the web, online, with mobile data recorders.
The biggest changes have been computers and GPS units.
Because if you've ever been ready mapping, it takes two people, a compass, and a chain all day long to map a track.
Now you walk around the track and bring it back, plug it into the computer draws a map, and you can put it on anything.
We're going to be managing more for view sheds and managing forests for water quality, for impacts on climate. The products are different. It's not necessarily about it's going to be about getting fiber to the mill.
We'll insert genes into loblolly pine that makes it resistant to southern pine beetle. We'll insert genes into certain species of trees that makes them resistant to phytophthora root rot. We'll have highly cultured, manicured plantations that will be managed solely for fiber production. The business of growing timber is going to become a business very much modeled after modern agriculture now.
I think more of our focus is simply going to be to keep forest in forest, because there are a lot of threats.
Losing the forest land base. We're going to have to grow better timber quicker on less land, because there's less land to meet the need.
So we're going to be dealing with landowners with smaller ownerships, which means we have to tone down our management recommendations to accept the fact that smaller timber volumes are going to be offered, smaller projects, smaller tree planting projects, everything is going to be smaller scale.
And some of these invasive species that we have now, they may be a major component of the forest in the future. And you're going to have to learn to deal with that and figure out ways of making use of those products.
If the state takes a close look at how many agencies are involved in water quality enforcement, it looks at how many agencies are involved in easements, there could be some drastic changes in the organization of state agencies.
If we have fewer and fewer employees, we're going to have to either network even more so with other agencies and fire departments and all, which we do network to a great extent now, but we'll have to utilize any new technology.
In 100 years from now, I would like to think that the Department of Forestry is still a viable part of the management of natural resources in Virginia. We got to be poised to be the knowledge brokers and to deliver that knowledge and be the experts in the field and be able to stay in the forefront on what changes, and then be the educators of the private sector that's going to be going out and doing the work.
And I think consultants will eventually probably become environmental managers, and the DOF will have probably less contact with the general public than we do right now in the terms of natural resource management.
And we're dealing with landowners that have little to zero knowledge of the environment and the forests that they hold so dear. We can offer totally objective forest management advice to landowners. And I think that's where our niche is, and I think we've got to recognize that.
If I could probably change one thing, it would be to try to get a few more employees. I think we're very short-handed at this point. Forestry is probably one of our most precious resources, and we're not putting enough into it for the future.
I always wanted to do a really strong marketing campaign and have money enough to hit TV with it, hit the radios with it.
I never really felt that I was in danger when I was actually physically fighting a fire.
There's a certain amount of a rush to a fire, so.
Where the fire behavior is going and you can't get it under control in time, and you have those mountains to contend with, and you have those pine plantations to contend with. It's just a difficult business, and it's very strenuous, and it's a dangerous business. If you don't realize all those things, then you know you're in for a big surprise one day, and hopefully it's not a bad surprise.
The most memorable fire in my mind, we had one fire that developed into 350 acres. We got that under control. We were still in the process of mopping that up. It turned out to be 405 acres. We got the fire crews there, but corresponding back and forth on the radio with the crew out on the line. And the wind was howling. Well, he called a third time. He said, "We've lost this line. What do you want us to do?" So there's a stream a mile north of you. Just deadhead through the woods as fast as you can, get to that stream, and that's going to be your fire line. Try to hold it there. Once you get there, backfire. And then it was just dead silence on that radio. It seemed like an hour, minute after minute after minute. Finally, they came back on it. So they backfired and then they held that line. I just breathed a sigh of relief. That's when, at that point, I started to relax, and this was hours.
We had the largest fire in the county since 1963, and that was Norwood Fire. And it's probably the most memorable one for me. It was 1,200 acres, 800 of that was on one landowner. It was very fast, very intense fire, flame lengths 50 foot tall on trees. That's even in hardwood trees. And I was in charge of a Keep Virginia Green crew, and we were supposed to just watch that line and make sure the fire didn't go over it. And I saw the fire coming through the woods, turned to these 16, 17-year-old kids, and I said, "Let's get the heck out of here." And we turned around and ran. And that was the first time I'd ever have to run from a fire. And it was pretty frightening for me and for the fact that I was responsible for these kids.
Dovell Mountain Fire in Page County in 1988. Very hot, dry summer, been in a drought. Had a lightning storm, set the forest on fire. And it was just one of those fires you just kind of wonder, you know, am I ever going to get this? Are the forces under control?
Strikes me as Heard's Mountain, and that was on Thanksgiving Day. The fire was pretty well contained to the mountain. There weren't a whole lot of houses there, but it was a lot of work and long hours and that kind of thing. And
probably February 10th, 2008 would stand out as a highlight because we had so many fires and all of us were on fires.
And I basically got ready, got my gear together, and sat down and waited for the fire alarm to go off. And when it did, you know, we had a routine 20-acre fire. And before we left that fire, we had a second fire called in. On the way, actually before Al could even get to the second fire with the dozer, he had a third fire he had to stop at. Before I left the first fire, 2 more fires got called in. And as I got into Victoria, which is fairly central in Lunenburg County, I could see smoke, good smokes, in at least 4 different directions. And at that moment, I was pretty overwhelmed because I just thought, you know, if there's only 2 of us, DOF, there's only 2 of us, how are we gonna go in 4 directions at once?
And when you see fire in the tops of trees that are, you know, 80 feet high, and you just have no earthly idea you're gonna put it out, that was scary. I mean, it was just, you know.
That was the worst one. The news came over the radio that we had an individual burned that had to be airlifted to MCV.
We all went home. About the time I pulled into the driveway, front came through, and the wind picked up so severely that I immediately just turned around and went back to where we had been burning that day. The dozer showed up about the same time I did, and we just started potato patching in front of the fire. About the time it was getting ready to hit about a 15-year-old pine plantation, the rain hit. Every bit of luck I ever had on a prescribed burn was used up right then.
My training was good. The PPE we were issued was good. Equipment, my co-workers, all of them were good.
You could hear something way up high in the mountain, and it sounded like, I don't know what it sounded like a herd of deer running or something. And you know, we're just standing around there, just foaming this thing. You know, I thought to myself a couple times, what in the world could that be? And it got closer, and down off the side of the mountain comes this boulder, about 4 foot in diameter. It comes between my state truck, my pickup truck, and the house there that we were trying to foam down, and pretty much demolishes the van sitting in the yard that belonged to, you know, to the homeowners there. And I thought that was, you know, I'd never seen anything like that before. I don't know if I can give anybody good advice. I can tell them what I did and what I liked.
That chief warden in 1958 doesn't know how significant his comment was when we stepped off the road that day and he said, your education is just about to begin.
To learn from some of the people who have been here for a while, and I know that sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but I learned a lot from people who have been here for a while. There's no, you can't put a price on experience.
First, forgive us for complaining all the time that things aren't as good as they used to be. Just overlook that part.
You know, we used to do it this way, or we used to do it that way. And, you know, sometimes you don't need to throw away the old ways and just have new ways. It's a good balance of both, I think.
Spend time with that person that's been around, that's been in your county for a long time. Hopefully they've been in that same county. And just get them to introduce you to everybody, because they know the landowners, they know the government officials, they know who's who. You need to get as much of that from them as you can before they retire.
The experience accounts for a whole lot, and people who have been there and done that, you can learn quite a bit from.
It entails working with people, getting to know them, recognizing that they're not always going to like what you have to tell them. So you learn to couch that in a different mode for each individual that you're talking to.
Your job is going to change. It's just the nature of the job and the nature of forestry in Virginia.
I would say keep an open mind, look into all different aspects of our job, you know, with the Department of Forestry, become interested in all of them.
I would tell them first to stay in the county and not look for promotions.
Well, I would probably say, you know, become part of your community. Wherever you live, you know, become part of the community, and at the same time become part of the organization.
To be involved in all kind of civic groups and farming groups, because that's where your clientele is going to be. And that's just a good way to spread our word and our services.
Foresters, I think, tend to be conservative, quiet lot. We like to be out in the woods by ourselves. We don't like to go into meetings. We don't like to talk to our newspaper reporters. We need to be doing more of that.
It's important to be organized. That's probably one of my shortcomings.
If you're a professional forester, then act like a professional forester, meaning that you don't have to apologize for recommending clear cutting. You don't have to apologize for putting out forest fires. You don't have to apologize for doing controlled burns. You don't have to apologize for spraying chemicals in the woods. That's just part of the basic biological management of a natural resource.
On a personal basis, you should save every dime that you can possibly save.
I would ask all of them to read. Read Leopold's essay on land ethics. Read everything Leopold has ever written, in my opinion. Read Thoreau. One author I would suggest that all of our new people read is Deeroff. All of the occasional reports that Tom did. I would put Deeroff and Leopold together. They're the two. If you can only read two, read those two.
In your life and in your job, you just need to be patient and have a really good sense of humor.
I can't say much more about things that's funny. Something funny happens every day.
She knew nothing about forestry, nothing about how trees grew, so I was trying to educate her on all that and the interactions between insects and trees and what. And it was just her and I and her sound/cameraman. And so we were walking single file through the woods. I was in front, she was behind me, and then our sound man behind her. And she said, "What are all these piles of little black things down on the ground?" And I just kind of tossed over my shoulders. We were walking, deer droppings. And I kept on walking and crunch, crunch, crunch down through the leaves, nobody talking or anything. She said, "Why did the deer drop them?" I didn't say a word. I'm glad that she could not see my face.
There's a tunnel between Norfolk and Portsmouth, and then they had a toll on the Virginia Beach Expressway. And I remember going to fires and having to stop the tractor transport to throw the change into the toll booth, or the toll baskets.
Dana Malone, at that time he was a forester in Loudoun County, he had come over with some men and he had left a fire line blower up there on the fire. He said, "When you get it back to me." And one of the guys called my radar and said, "Well, we found where the fire line blower used to be." I said, what do you mean used to be?" He said, "Well, it's all melted." And so bring back the parts. So he brought back a little tiny piece that had the inventory number on it. So I stuck it in a business size white envelope, mailed it back to Dana and said, "Here's what's left of your fire line blower. But you got the inventory number so you can turn it back in."
Awfully large trailer exhibits. We made everything out of the heaviest plywood that we could make it out of. I remember coming back from a parade in Virginia Beach, watching one of these things sort of fall apart on Interstate 64 as we were coming back to the office, and at the end of the trip back to the Portsmouth office, the Smoky Bear box was on the interstate and the float was in tatters.
When I was working part-time with the Young Adult Conservation Corps, one end and two at the other end, and paint boundary lines along the road, and when we got to the middle, we would switch keys to the vehicles so that when you got to the end, you could have a vehicle to get back to the office. These guys were somewhere between 18 and 21 years old. They decided that they couldn't just hand one another the keys at midway. They had to throw them up in the air as high as possible and exchange in midair. And so when the keys came down, the one set came down fine, but the other set went in the bucket of paint. And so they're looking at me, and I said, "You're the one that put it in there. You reach in there and get it out." So.
Remember, it was when we first got ATVs. There's a gentleman I was working with in the county at the time named Ed Jarrett, and he and I were on one side of the fire with the ATV, and it was a red ATV, and we called it Big Red. And on the other side of the fire, they needed some help, and they radioed. And he said, "Who's over there?" And I said, "It was Ed, Fred, and Big Red." And he said, "Well, two of you stay there, and one of you come here."
I was dressing, and I didn't turn on the bedroom light, didn't want to disturb my wife, so I was dressing in the dark. So I got out clothes, what I thought was fire clothes from the closet, put them on. And I was putting on my fire shirt, and I was going to put my shirt tail in, open the pants. And these pants just don't feel quite right. But they're the right color, so maybe they're fire pants. So I looked down there and finally saw this tag sticking out. Opened the tag up and it said, "Official Uniform, Boy Scouts of America." So I put on my scout leader pants instead. Looked like fire clothes to me in the dark.
But I don't know, it was a lot of good times. Had some fun times.
For me, I was on a controlled burn once, and the fellow with me panicked and ran headfirst into a tree and knocked himself out. And I got some water and dumped it on his face, and he caved to, and I said, "All right, now you've had enough, let's go out."
My career with the Department of Forestry was the best way I could have spent my working life. The best organization, the best people, and the work that I did, even as an administrator, gave me a sense of satisfaction that makes me think my life had some meaning. Wonderful place to have been for 38 years. The best.
It was a fun trip. I would say to anybody that my 46 years, I was blessed. I really was. To have been surrounded by such good people and to have been taught by such good people.
I would like to say that I've enjoyed my career very much. I'm continually humbled by the people that I'm fortunate enough to work with, and it's been a good ride. And I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to do it.